Good evening, I'm Dennis Ward. Welcome to APTN National News. At least 750 unmarked graves have been found at the Cowicess Residential School in Saskatchewan. The discovery came soon after radar searches were conducted on the grounds earlier this month. APTN's Priscilla Wolf has the story.
We started our radar penetrating research on June the 2nd, 21. As of yesterday, we have hit 751 unmarked graves.
Cowicess First Nation Chief Cadmus DeLorme says the graves belong to children connected to the Merivale Indian Residential School that operated in the community from 1899 to 1997.
This is not a mass grave site. These are unmarked graves.
The graveyard was run by the church until 1970, until it became a community cemetery taken over by the First Nation. Chief DeLorme says they plan to search and put names or at least headstones for each unmarked grave.
We didn't remove these headstones. Removing headstones is a crime in this country. And we are treating this like a crime scene at the moment. And we will know more as we continue our research.
He adds that our oral stories included stories of unmarked graves at the residential school site.
Over the past years, the oral stories of our elders, of our survivors, and friends of our survivors have told the stories that knew these burials were here.
Elder Florence Sparvier, who is now 80, attended the Merivale Indian Residential School and says she is glad that the world is hearing the truth now and how our people were forced to attend these residential schools.
I'm 80 years old and I went to boarding school down there. I was taken by my parents to go. At that time, if the parents didn't want to allow their children to go to boarding school, one of them had to go to jail.
Sparvier says the residential schools stripped us of our Indigenous identity and made us feel ashamed of our culture and language.
When we became assimilated, they made us think different and feel different. So it's a lot of the pain that we see in our people right now.
Chief Bobby Cameron of the FSIN says the churches need to hand over the records so we can identify these spirits that are being uncovered in unmarked graves.
We try to put ourselves in the eyes and the bodies of these children who are now being found in the ground, who have been waiting for decades to have a proper burial and to be honored properly amongst their own protocols, traditions, and customs. And a small First Nations voice said, "They found us. They found us."
Priscilla Wolf, APTN National News, Saskatoon.
The National Indian Residential School Crisis Line is available for survivors and others who might need support. That number is 1-866-925-4419. For more, we're joined by residential school survivor Geraldine Shingoose, who attended the Muskowhegan Residential School in Saskatchewan from 1962 to 1971. Jerry, thanks so much for being with us on such a difficult day. We knew this day would be coming, that there were more of these sites that would be discovered, although that doesn't make it any easier. But how are you handling today's news?
Okay, I was expecting more sites to be found, but I didn't expect, this amount to be found. It was very huge number of children to be found, and my initial response is I broke down. I cried. I cried for those children, and I cried for the community. I cried for the survivors, myself, including as a survivor. It was very emotional time for me last night when I heard the news.
Jerry, you and a group of survivors are planning to head to Kamloops next week. Can you tell us about that trip and the special bundle that you're taking with you?
Okay, we're traveling on ourselves, myself, Vivian Ketchum, and Chickadee Richards. We're leaving on June 28th and be back here in Winnipeg on July the 5th, and we're traveling by vehicles. And we're delivering a Sacred Fire bundle. As you know, Winnipeg held a Sacred Fire for the 215 children here at the Manitoba Ledge. So we're taking those ashes, the people's prayers, to Kamloops Residential School. We are caravanning. All plans are in place, and we're going to have a sacred ceremony on June 28th at 8:30 at Peguis First Nation on Portage Avenue. Yeah, they're going to send us off in a good way, and yeah, looking forward to the journey. We're doing the journey in lieu of the 215 children that were found. We want to offer our condolences. We want to offer our love and support from Treaty 1 territory. And along the way, we're stopping in Brandon, and we're going to be putting out some tobacco ties. And then also, we're going to be stopping in Cowessess First Nation. And we're going to be offering the tobacco ties and the traditional flags to the community, offering our condolences.
You know, on the heels of the ceremony at the Ledge, you camped out outside of the Catholic Church just a few blocks from here, wanting to talk to the Archdiocese of Winnipeg. Can you tell us what you'd like to see from the Catholic Church?
Initially, when the 215 children, what I was seeking was justice for the little children, the 215. And I was seeking criminal charges, somebody to be held responsible and accountable. Like we had a meeting set at 11 a.m. He didn't show up, and I ended up waiting 10 hours for him. He finally came after 10 hours, and I met with him, and I shared that message with him. But I also asked him to, we're seeking for Pope Francis to come to Canada to offer that condolences, but also the apologies to the 215 children that were found on the soil of Canada. Like, you know, we can't go to the Vatican. He needs to come here on our ground, because that's where he's honoring those little children if he does that. And, we need him here to offer condolences on behalf of the Catholic Church, because today's news was a huge impact on our people, the residential school survivors from nation to nation. So he didn't offer any apologies. He didn't express any sincerity or genuine sincerity to the 215 children when I met him. And he met because he was pressured to come and meet with me.
Mm-hmm. Well, Jerry, we sure thank you for sharing with us here today, and wishing you and Viv and Chickadee a safe journey out west.
Okay, thank you, Dennis.
And Jerry, Viv, and Chickadee will be meeting with leaders in Kamloops Teesquatmuk on July 2nd. Meanwhile, the Grand Chiefs of two Manitoba organizations held a joint press conference to reflect on today's announcement from Saskatchewan. With more on what they had to say, here's APTN's Daryl Stranger.
Of course, we are all filled with sadness as we think about the people in Cowessess, Saskatchewan.
Leadership from Northern and Southern Manitoba Indigenous organizations joined together to share their thoughts on today's news from Saskatchewan. Southern Chiefs Organization Grand Chief Jerry Daniels said the news from Kamloops and Cowessess and those that will follow is of international importance.
I think it's important that the world reflects on what exactly happened here, because we are talking about genocide of a people, the killing of children, and then the hiding and denying of the truth. That is what the record shows as it relates to Canada and its treatment of Indigenous children over the last 200-some years.
MKO Grand Chief Garrison Satie echoed the same thoughts, saying Canada can no longer conceal what happened in these institutions.
Canada can no longer hide the hidden truth. And we want the world to know that an atrocity was committed in this country, and this country was founded on assimilation policies that killed our people and killed our children in residential schools, and that Canada cannot go into the international community and try to chastise other people for injustices when the injustice that's committed on our land has not been addressed.
As for residential schools in Manitoba, the provincial government announced $2.5 million in funding to investigate burial sites in the province. Daniel said the exact use of that money has yet to be determined, but families need to take the lead.
We haven't had a discussion yet with the province on exactly how we think that those funds should be utilized, although we're taking the same approach again as I stated earlier, with the families sort of taking the lead, getting a bit of background on all of the residential schools. I think we had about 9 in southern Manitoba, and so we want to be able to get an idea of how many of our citizens had attended there, and what records we do have.
Both Satie and Daniel said work will continue with families and First Nations to locate and find those lost loved ones, and that the work and healing needed is only just beginning. Daryl Stranger, APTN National News, Winnipeg.
News of this latest discovery comes just as governments grapple with what to do next. Several provinces and the federal government have pledged almost $50 million to support searches at the sites of former residential schools. British Columbia has not committed any funds to date. More than half of that money comes from the federal government, while Ontario is coming up with $10 million in support. Manitoba announced $2 million this week, Saskatchewan $2.5 million, and Alberta's premier announced $8 million last night. The race for the national chief is well underway. We'll speak with one of the candidates after the break. Welcome back. Well, as I tried to explain before the break, the race for head of the Assembly of First Nations is well underway. Perry Bellegarde has decided not to seek a third term as national chief. APTN News is speaking with all 7 candidates in the July 7th virtual election. And joining us today is Kevin Hart, the former AFN regional chief for Manitoba. Kevin, thanks for being with us. As I mentioned, for the past 6 years, you've been the AFN regional chief for Manitoba. Well, why have you decided now to run for national chief?
Well, in the most humble way, I was asked by leadership from across the country, including leaders here within the Manitoba region. After that, seeking advice from my wife, my family, my children, and close friends, I decided that I would put my name forward. It didn't come at an easy time as well, given that I was the co-chair of the COVID-19 task force, holding the portfolio of emergency measures. At the Assembly, I've held some very critical portfolios with a wealth of experience that I felt that I've been able to deliver to our First Nations across the country, from coast to coast to coast, them being housing, water, infrastructure, emergency measures, as I just mentioned. Under social development, the continued fight under the Canadian Human Rights Tribunal for our children. I also helped coordinate the co-drafting of C-92, working with great people such as Mary Ellen Turpel-Lafond, that was guided by our chiefs from across this country. And when we talked about creating this act, as well as when we talk about the sovereignty and jurisdiction of our children. Under that also, I fought with the portfolio of Jordan's Principle. We could see the investments that has resulted in billions of dollars being accessed by First Nations across this country for what I feel is some of our most critical and precious resource, our children. I fought for our children hard at the CHRT. I fought with them in creating laws for us to be able to take over the jurisdiction of our children under C-92. I fought hard for our little ones with the investments in early learning and childcare, as well as when we look at the social aspect. The chiefs of the day have always said that we need to find equity for our First Nations people when we talk about income assistance in our First Nations, and for it to be overhauled. I mean, we're only, as a single person, you're only allowed $220 a month, if that, in some of our First Nations. How is someone in 2021 supposed to live with that, given the chronic underfunding in our First Nations, and also when we talk about food security? When we look at missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls, the portfolio I had there, as well as the National Inquiry and Women's Council, I listened to our women leadership from across the country, and they brought their voices forward for me to be that helper to them and that messenger to make sure that the lost and forgotten voices were not silenced. And even more so now when we look about the 215 children that were found in Kamloops, and now we look at Chief Cadmus Delorme and the Cowessess First Nation, 751 children found in unmarked grave. Why isn't Canadians screaming out for the United Nations to intervene, because a genocide has indeed occurred here in Canada? These residential school sites should be treated as crime scenes. They should have the United Nations intervening and investigating this, because a genocide indeed has occurred. We're seeing with the experience and the finding of these unmarked graves that so many people are being affected and traumatized each and every day. I know that since last night about the early news, and that for us as survivors, and both intergenerational survivors and us as First Nations, we're deeply affected right now. For myself, when we look at all those things, everyone's looking for some leadership, and for someone to have that experience to say, if they're sworn in as the national chief on July 7th, they're willing to take that helm. They have the experience to take that helm. The rest of the candidates have that experience in being able to write laws when it comes to the jurisdiction of our children. Have they been able to work with our chiefs from coast to coast to coast under the various portfolios that I've had? The answer is no.
Regional Chief Hart will have to leave it there, but appreciate you taking some time for us, and good luck.
Thank you. Take care, Dennis.
We'll continue our interviews with the candidates for National Chief here tomorrow night, and you can find more on the race on our website, aptnnews.ca. Time to step aside for another quick break, but stick around. There's more to come. Welcome back. Time now for our photo of the day. We've had a couple of pictures sent to us by Greg Scriver, including this beauty. Not Doug. Sorry, Greg, we got your name wrong yesterday. Laying that on Melissa. Here's another view of the sunrise taken on the morning of the summer solstice. Thanks again, Greg. And if you want to send us more photos, or if anybody else wants to, you can send them to share@aptn.ca for your chance to be featured as our next photo of the day. Let's take a peek at tomorrow's weather forecast. Starting on the East Coast, 23 and sunny for St. John's, showers, and 21 in Halifax. 19 with showers in Kuujjuaq and Nain. 29 in Montreal, showers, and 20 for Chibougamau. Rain, and 23 in Sault Ste. Marie, 22 with showers in North Bay. Sunny and 27 for Thunder Bay, 25 under the sun for Sioux Lookout. 24 with showers for God's Lake and Puckatawagan. 29 in Winnipeg, Gimli, and Dauphin. 26 and sunny in Regina, 1 degree warmer in Saskatoon and North Battleford. 27 with showers in Meadow Lake, 26 in Buffalo Narrows. In northern Alberta, cloudy and 27 in Fort McMurray, 31 under the sun for Grand Prairie. 28 and sunny in Edmonton, 26 and sunny for Lethbridge. Sunny and 27 for Vancouver, 29 under the sun in Victoria, 26 in Dease Lake, 30 and sunny in Prince George. Showers and 21 for Old Crow, rain and 20 in Whitehorse, 20 in Yellowknife, 29 in Norman Wells and Wrigley, 11 in Sax Harbor, 20 in Paulatuck, 8 in Arviette, 7 for Cambridge Bay, 6 in Resolute and Joe Haven. Toronto's Indigenous community now has access to more cultural programs in the city's West End. With over 90,000 urban Indigenous peoples living in the city, it's been a long time coming and a welcome sight. Here's Annette Francis with that story.
The virtual celebration for the new centre began with the traditional song and dance, an opening prayer, and of course, speeches. Jeffrey Schiffer says the Mount Dennis Aboriginal Child and Family Centre will provide services in a neighbourhood that hasn't been culturally reflective for the Indigenous population.
These centers really address the intergenerational impacts of colonization. There has been so much discussion right now about residential schooling and child welfare and the way that community members continue to be impacted by that legacy. We need culturally grounded supports and education for our young ones so that they grow up connected to their culture, even when they're in Canada's largest urban center, and that's really what these centers provide.
Mayor John Tory joined in the opening event. He said it's a result of 2.5 years of collaboration with the city and community partners.
This happy day comes at a very difficult time for Indigenous communities in Toronto and across Turtle Island following the horrific discovery that Jeffrey made reference to earlier in Kamloops. And of course, that was a discovery that really followed on many years of history. But maybe the discovery in Kamloops has brought us face to face in a way like never before with this tragedy and with the ongoing trauma that it has represented for a long time for very many people. All of us as elected officials and community partners are committed to better supporting Indigenous communities and ensuring that they're at the table with us, bringing forward ideas and making them happen like is happening here today.
This is the second cultural centre that Native Child and Family Services has opened in the city. Rita Red Sky Hamlin is a supervisor for the new centre. She says there's something for everyone.
There isn't too much in the West End. So originally Native Child had a Kiiwetinoong Aboriginal Head Start, and that is probably one of the only services that we offered in the West End. So now we're going to be offering this multi-service space where we can service seniors, youth, and the early years all in one place.
According to Schiffer, throughout the summer, programs will continue to be offered virtually and in the outdoor space. Annette Francis, APTN National News, Toronto.
Well, that's all the time we have for your APTN National News for this Thursday. There is much more over on our website, aptnnews.ca. I'm Dennis Ward. Thanks for being with us tonight. Take care. We'll see you back here tomorrow.